our focus is on the poorest of the poor. So that's people who make $1 a day or less. And the reason India, that was the country I was working in with Reach Global, and I became educated on that. And I believe it's the country God led me to. But also I see now that the needs there are, I would say it's a country with the greatest needs on so many levels. I mean, there's more orphans in India than any other country, 37 million. And there's more trafficking of children and women than any other country. There's more unreached people groups, meaning all kinds of languages and people that have never even heard of Jesus, don't even have a church there yet.
Hello, sweet friends. I'm Stephanie Jacobs, a storyteller and advocate for social justice, and your host of the Love Light Stories podcast, a place where we uncover a deeper understanding of humanity through beautiful, redemptive stories that inspire our hearts. If you long to see more love, empathy, and true connection in our world and your own life, you're in the right place. After spending multiple years studying social justice issues, I've realized the power story has in helping us to understand, empathize, and transform our worldviews into something that's just that, views that are truly worldly. Here in this space, we'll embrace our humanity through raw and authentic stories told by real people themselves. We'll amplify their voices and learn to connect in more meaningful ways. Poverty, human trafficking, incarceration, race, immigration, and more. We'll embrace difficult conversations, sometimes controversial topics, and lighthearted stories too. If you wish to uncover the hope, love, empathy, and connection we can find in our fellow humanity, this is a show for you. So, are you ready, lovely? Let's jump in. Well, hello there, lovely. Welcome back to the Love Light Stories podcast, where we create space for real personal stories to be seen, heard, and understood. If you haven't yet, be sure to rate the show, follow, and share it with your family and friends. Today on the podcast, I'm welcoming Tracy Alin. She founded Amistad Worldwide in 2010, and she has served as a social worker and chaplain in long-term care facilities for 25 years. Tracy's also currently an online professor teaching in Bible colleges in both India and Nepal. Today you'll hear Tracy's testimony story and how God is at work in India saving orphaned children, supporting widows, loving lepers, and more. Through this episode, you'll come to better understand the caste system and how it affects various people groups, making them some of the most vulnerable in the world. I've known Tracy for many years already, as she's actually my husband's aunt. As you can imagine, we've had so many conversations about the materially poor and what God is doing around the world. It's such a blessing to be interested in similar work and to have learned from Tracy over the years. As you listen, it won't take you long to see how pure and intentional Tracy's heart is for helping the most vulnerable around the world. I'm really excited for you to listen in and come to understand not only her heart, but that of RK and the children he's raising in the orphanages. It paints a beautiful picture of what can happen when people across cultures around the world all say yes to the same calling God has placed inside of them. Tracy, thank you so much for joining me on the Love Light Stories podcast today. It's just such a pleasure and an honor to have you here with us today.
Oh, thank you so much. I'm honored to be here too, Stephanie.
Yes, so I already gave everyone a little insight on my intro that I know you well because you're my relative, you're my husband Sam's aunt. And so I've gotten to know you and Amistad Worldwide over the last multiple years, which we're going to dig into that more later. But one thing that I hadn't taken the time to fully understand was your own story of how you got into this work. And so this conversation is really exciting for me, but also going to be so insightful for the listeners. So help us just understand what it was that led you to do the work that you're doing today. Take us to that moment, that beginning place.
Okay. Yeah, so I'm thinking back to my growing up years. I grew up in a pretty average family. We did not travel a lot. We really didn't take vacations. And I think from a young age, I began to long to see other parts of the world. That was kind of a small thing that was happening in me. But it really wasn't until I got into college, and I was living with Christian roommates, and we began searching for a church that we all wanted to attend together. And we began visiting a series of churches over the period of a couple of months. And it seemed like every time we went to a church, it was Mission Sunday for this season of time. And that meant that there would be a missionary in the service telling their story. And for me, it just touched my heart. Every time I heard a story, it opened my eyes. It just affected me in such a deep way. Like it just drew my interest. It was almost like a spark that got lit inside of me the first story I heard. And we would get done with the service, and I would want to keep talking with my roommates about what we'd heard. And we did for a while, but then they were ready to move on with the day. But I was just pondering that the whole situation, whatever it was that missionary had talked about. And so this went on for a period of a few months. And, prior to that, growing up, I was part of a very large church, but sadly, I was not exposed to anything related to missions or overseas work at all. And so for me, it was really my first time hearing about this work and just broadening my vision for what the world was and all these different people and all the different issues they face. And so during my college years, my summer after my sophomore year, I thought I'd like to use this summer maybe to take a missions trip. So I went to my pastor at the time and I asked him if he knew of any good music missions organizations, because I'm really into music and I play the violin. And he told me about a group called Celebrant Singers. And anyway, long story short, I auditioned and I got on the team, and we had to train in Visalia, California. And then we spent the summer traveling in Bulgaria, putting on concerts and talking with people, sharing our testimonies. And then we traveled around the United States as well. And so that really opened my eyes to actually being in another culture, and I loved it. And I had the opportunity to stay on for long term with that organization, but I felt I should come back and finish college. But at that point, I really knew missions was going to be part of my life in the future. I didn't think necessarily at that point that I was going to be a full-time missionary, but I knew for sure there was a fire in me, and it was just growing. It wasn't diminishing. And even with that summer, it wasn't easy. We rode a bus without air conditioning all summer. We stayed in host homes throughout the U.S. and Bulgaria, and we had to ride sometimes 8-10 hours a day on a crowded bus. But even with those struggles, I loved the idea of going to another culture and being able to share the love of God with people that may have never heard of that before. So yeah, that's kind of where it began. And then I just started taking trips after that. I went and worked. I have most of a nursing degree as well, so I went and worked in hospitals in Mexico and Ecuador. And I love that aspect of hands-on, helping people with basic physical needs, the humanitarian aspect, you could say. And then I went to Africa. After John and I got married, we led a team to Africa. And that was extremely eye-opening because we were in the middle of bush country and Muslim area. And many people there had never heard of Christianity or Jesus. And our church was hoping to plant missionaries within that group. So we were to be the eyes and ears and to go and pray and look and search. And a wonderful result came of that. There was a couple that was placed in that group and spent 20 years establishing the church there. So,
wow.
So yeah. And then just from there went on to become involved in a deeper way with the establishment of Amistad.
Wow. Yes. And we'll get into Amistad in a little bit. And you mentioned that the fire just continued to grow in you. Can you describe how that felt, or what things you were experiencing? Were you getting messages from God, or what was happening?
Yeah. I was growing a lot in my faith at the same time as this was happening, because I had these wonderful Christian roommates who they loved to study the Bible. They loved to go to prayer meetings, and they were so joyful about their faith. And, I'd grown up in a very conservative, quiet Lutheran home where we didn't really talk a lot about our faith. And they were actually Assemblies of God. So it was like kind of opposite ends of the spectrum. But I couldn't get enough knowledge. I was just soaking. I think I was just open at that point in my life to knowing about life. I was curious. I was searching. And I wanted significance and meaning. And of course, I found that with God. But then I wanted to know, God, what do you want me to do with my life? And as this passion just kept growing in me, it was just something I thought about a lot. It was on my mind and heart. I got excited about it. I couldn't quit thinking about it if I tried. And the way I would describe it now is if I didn't act on it, I'd be so miserable. Like
Mm.
it would be far pricier for me not to act on this. And even when this began growing in my heart, I thought, okay, it's true. I haven't traveled much. So is this more yearning for adventure and travel than it is to really spread the gospel to other nations? What is this? I was trying to figure it out myself. So I thought I should be doing more here first, if this is really my desire to serve God in this way. And so I worked at Salvation Army for a while with homeless, and then I worked with Native Americans out on the White Earth Indian Reservation, and then I worked with Hispanic kids here. Just did a variety of different outreaches just to kind of get my feet wet in ministry to cultures that are even here. And then I spent, of course, the last 25 years working in nursing homes, which that's really its own culture too. And I realized that my calling, I became more and more aware in doing that work as well as work here that I had a huge heart for not just people abroad in particular, but people that are marginalized, people that are forgotten. Just I felt so sorry for people that their life just isn't any fun. I mean, they're just put off to the side, often through no fault of their own, whether it be through
Mm.
illness or disability, um, or in cases overseas of poverty and discrimination and bad governments and bad choices of other people. And so I began to really see this calling unfolding in my life that maybe it's not just here or there, maybe it's both places. And that's really what it's been for me is, focusing on the least of these here, which I do believe are people in our nursing homes. It's easy to drive by and not even know what's going on behind the door of that place. And there's a lot of suffering people
Mm.
that are kind of forgotten. So yeah, I wanted my heart to be real. I wanted to be in missions for the right reason. But as I got involved here, I still continued to be so fascinated and interested with stories I would hear, and I started reading a lot of books, attending classes. I just couldn't get enough. I guess that's how I
Yeah.
would describe it. It was almost like a drug for me. Um, just
Yeah.
couldn't get
Yeah.
it. And as I saw that people around me didn't necessarily have that, I thought I would just pray and I said, God, I think you're calling me to do something about this because I can't seem to. It doesn't go away. It's just growing more and more. It's like a fire that's being fanned into flame more and more.
Right. I love that too, that you were so open that you allowed yourself to explore what was here and serve here, but also serve overseas. Because you hear people from different camps,
Yeah.
being more passionate about different things. And I think we're all called to different places of the world, whether it's local or not. And
Right.
so I think it's all wonderful. And I love that you explored all of it. And it sounds like because you had this open heart, God allowed you to continue yearning for Him and longing for Him and what He had called you to do. And I think it takes an inner awareness too, and really that spiritual discipline to be able to listen to that, seek that, and then continue to follow that, because some people are open, but they get lost along the way, and that didn't happen to you. I just love that about you and how you've just followed your heart continually with the goal of trying to help people and those that are really struggling in the margins. So thank you for that. And okay, so now with your story, tell us how you ended up starting Amistad Worldwide. What led you to that? Connect us to that point.
Yeah, so through this process of exploring other cultures and just wanting to learn as much as I can, I took a class which came to our community. It's a graduate level class, but it was put on by a pastor that I knew, and he would invite seminary professors and different people to come and speak every week. And anyone could take the class. You could take it for credit or just for a certificate or just for enjoyment. It's called Perspectives on the World Christian Movement. And if you haven't taken that class, anyone listening, I highly recommend that class. It really opens your eyes to just so many things. But anyway, so I took that. I helped bring the class to Fargo, and then I also just was a student in that class. And I remember hearing just so many pearls of wisdom from the different speakers. But one in particular, really, a couple things stood out. And one of them was the professor, the one night said, "I need 10 volunteers," and I came up with 9 other people. And they put 9 of them on one side of the stage, and then I was by myself on the other side. And that professor said, "Do you know that 90% of the missionaries go where the church is already established and where a lot of work is going on, and they just join that force?" 1% of our missions force goes to the hard places, to the place where there's persecution, to the place where the church isn't yet established or it's very slowly being established. That got my attention. And then also, he said, if you can't go as a missionary yourself, send 10 in your place. And he was talking about being a mobilizer, inspiring others to get on board, or just somehow working from your home country to help others. And so that came back to me not long ago, and I'll explain more about that later. But basically, after that class, I loved taking that class so much that I started working for a master's degree just because I wanted to study. I didn't even know what my degree was going to be in, but I applied to Columbia International University in South Carolina, and I completed a master's degree in 2010. And we had a speaker come to my church and speak on human trafficking in India. And wow, that just ripped my heart out to hear about children being sold for sex at age 7, at age 10, being promised jobs in the city, but then being taken, passed around, and, sometimes 20 men a night coming to them, and oftentimes losing their life before the age of 26 is the average age that they survive till.
Wow.
And I couldn't believe at that point in my life that I had never heard of human trafficking. I was in my 30s, I think, at that point. And so anyway, I went on then to do a thesis in human trafficking. And I served with Reach Global for 3 years, where I traveled around and educated churches, business groups on human trafficking. And we established one sewing center up in West Bengal, because that's where Reach Global was working exclusively, was India. And I took my first vision trip to India. And my heart began to really see what it's like in a place like India, the huge amount of needs, everything from lack of water, lack of education, the trafficking issues. I came back and I started really thinking about, wow, what if I started my own charity? And I had people in my life. I was blessed to have people in my life that I thought were so smart and smart with finances, smart with business. And I knew I needed those kind of people to start a charity. But I just began thinking, what if I just had all this fire and drive in me, and I'd been a part of Reach Global, and that had been a positive experience in many ways. But I was just longing to lead something myself, because I had my own dreams and my own things that I wanted to do. And sometimes things can get bogged down when an organization becomes huge. And I knew I wanted mine to be different. I wanted it to be where 100% goes overseas, 100% of the funds, just so focused on helping people that nothing is going to get in the way of that. Anyway, long story short, then I established Amistad. I found some of these people around me to help me, and we wrote up bylaws, and within 4 months we were accepted in North Dakota, and that was amazing.
Wow.
It usually takes a year, and you have to rewrite your laws so many times. We didn't even hire a lawyer.
Wow.
So it shows how smart these people were that were helping me, because they knew we looked at another charity, a friend of mine, he had a charity, and we looked at his wording. We kind of tried to follow that, because he had a similar vision as we did.
Yep.
And
Yep.
we ended up having it established so quick.
Wow. Incredible. Yes, you had the foresight to surround yourself with the people that knew how to do the work that needed to be done. And that's just incredible. So help us understand a little bit then more of the why behind Amistad. And maybe it was back then or what it is today, but help us understand your organization a little bit and why you exist in India specifically.
Yeah, great question. When I was thinking of starting a charity, I thought I didn't have any plans to be super unique or reinvent the wheel. Obviously, there's a ton of charities out there, but I knew that I had been blessed because of my travels and because of being involved in missions boards at my churches. I knew a lot of people on the mission field, and I saw how they were working so hard. They were like the unsung heroes, whether it's rescuing kids from trafficking or establishing churches or just any host of amazing works being done, but they had no time to go fundraise. They had no time to even go and speak about their work. So I wanted to be that friend, and Amistad means friendship. I wanted to be the friend to the missionary. Just find out from them, what do you need? Not me coming and deciding, I think you need to do this and we need to do this, but coming in as a learner and saying, how can I serve you? How can we help with poverty, long-term sustainable solutions for poverty, not just a handout. Sometimes we have to do handouts, but how can we bring out the dignity of people and bring out their talents and abilities, because people are so talented all around the world and they do have potential. And so often they've been made to believe they have nothing to offer.
Yeah.
But our focus is on the poorest of the poor. So that's people $1 a day or less, people who make $1 a day or less. And the reason India, that was the country I was working in with Reach Global, and I became educated on that. And I believe it's the country God led me to. But also I see now that the needs there are, I would say it's a country with the greatest needs on so many levels. I mean, there's more orphans in India than any other country, 37 million.
Mm.
And there's more trafficking of children and women than any other country. There's more unreached people groups, meaning all kinds of languages and people that have never even heard of Jesus don't even have a church there yet. And not only that, but the poverty situation, a lot of that's related to the caste system, which is the Hindu. Their Hindu is the main religion there, and they believe in 333 million gods. And they believe if you end up as an orphan, a widow, or in a low caste, which they have different social levels of importance, if you end up
Mm-hmm.
in any of those categories, that you've done something very wrong in the earlier life. So they believe in reincarnation, and so they think, well, now the gods are punishing you because of your bad behavior in the life before. So because of this mindset they have, they can easily look at an orphan, a street child who's just living in the garbage dump, and they can just turn away from that because they think,
Mm.
who am I to interfere with what the gods are doing? And so I
Wow.
see that these people who are so talented, I mean, in my city here, we have so many Indian doctors, we have Indian professors. The Indians are so motivated and they're very smart. And if they're given an opportunity in their hand, they will run with it.
Yeah.
And so when I saw all of these things, I knew that India was my calling, and I had done my thesis, so I'd learned already so much about it. For 3 years, I wrote my thesis and read books and studied. And plus, I didn't mention in college, one of my roommates was from India. So now,
Okay.
you can look back on your life and see God's hand, how he was just pushing you a certain direction. And I was
Yes.
also really enamored with Mother Teresa starting in college. I was just fascinated with her work. So I think I started reading about India even way back when I didn't know anything about it. So, yeah,
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
some of it.
Wow. Okay. Getting back to the caste system, that's something that, unless we ascribe to that, it's hard for us to understand, I think. Turning away from an orphan child that's knocking on your door that needs food or needs shelter or something. And I guess hearing you say that these people just, it's their religion and they're truly believing that the gods are creating this fate, if you will, I guess in some way gives a little more understanding to it. But how have you reconciled all of that in your head? Have you thought about that more? And like, what are your thoughts on that?
That's a deep and good question. It's actually caused a crisis in me sometimes because, like, I've always believed that every human being has a conscience, and I've talked with people about this, and I've talked with my mission partners about this, because I think even here in America, like, even if a person isn't a believing Christian, if a child came begging at our doorstep, I would say the great majority of people would want to help, would be moved to
Mm.
do something, even if it's just bringing the child to a foster home, or a place that can help children like that. But to just shut the door on their face and leave them out in the cold, or out in the heat, whatever, wherever they are, it just seems so harsh and so cold to me. And so that has been an inner struggle that I've had of like I love this culture, but I hate this. I hate this. I hate what I see here. I hate this cruelty, this complete lack of understanding or value of human life and dignity, and even how they discard female babies. That still goes on, where if a boy is born, an infant boy, celebration occurs, but if an
Mm.
infant girl comes, there's mourning and crying. And even my mission partner, he lives close to a river, and he's told me for many years, when he walks by that river, he often sees the body of a baby in that river.
Wow.
And it's just so hard to comprehend because we think that's so barbaric, and here, people are arrested for those things. But I think you have to study the culture, and you have to realize this is just so ingrained from years and years and years, that it's been pushed upon them in school. I mean, and it's subtle, but it's there. And when I'm thinking judgmental thoughts on them, though, then I think of myself and I think, okay, do we have a caste system here? I thought that one day. Do we have a caste system here? And I always try to pride myself on being like not judgmental and thinking everyone's equal and all this. But then I thought, what if somebody came to me today, or better yet, when my son was really young, and said, we want to build a halfway house on the end of your block. Are you okay with that?
Hmm.
Would I be okay with that? And knowing my son is going to walk by there every day, and he's going to be out playing, and there's going to be people that are struggling with alcoholism in and out of that house. That's one example.
Yeah.
And I think caste is very subtle, but I think it exists actually everywhere in the world. But what's just so hard about India is, it's just nationwide, and it was taught just in such a systematic way for years, and now they say it's illegal. However, it's still ingrained in people. And I'll give you one more example of that. Like orphans and widows, I told you they're really considered the lowest of the low. And if a person sees a face of a widow before noon, I think it is, they have to run back to their home and like do this ceremonial washing. The Hindus do, because they think they're going to be cursed. Bad luck is going to come. Or if a widow is in a village and someone dies there, calamity happens, she's often beaten and thrown out of the village, thinking she brings bad luck. And there used to be a practice years ago called sati, and that means widow burning. And what would happen is when a man would die, his wife would be tied to him as his body is burned on the funeral pile right by the river. And she'd be burned along with him. And on her chest, there'd be a sign that said worthless.
Oh my
Their
goodness.
equivalent in Indian. And that was called sati. And it was a common practice, because what good is a woman without a man? That's her thinking.
Wow.
And even though that is outlawed, it may still occur in isolated places. The mindset is there. Like today,
Hmm.
still the widow, she's bad luck. Can't have her around. And so even sons and daughters will abandon their mother because they feel so scared. They're so scared about this. And so, sometimes I think, okay, our job is to really, with missions nowadays, is to just empower, let other people handle that, let their own people handle that. But I think in a situation like India, there has to be outside help, because within the country, there's just all this discrimination. And so who's going to help them? And then the
Right.
Christians, even like my mission partner, he's a wonderful man, but he faces so much discrimination because he's ministering and helping such people.
Hmm.
Um, so
Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
why we're working in India.
Right. And there's also just so much corruption outside of the caste system in India too. I know you were talking
Yes.
about that. And so it really creates this layer effect that makes it really difficult. And like you said, you need outside support to walk together to create this system of stability essentially in what you're doing. So, okay, you mentioned your mission partner.
Mhm.
Can you share a little bit about how you support your mission partner in India and just the types of people groups that you actually work with?
Sure. So I'm not going to use his name for security reasons. He faces a lot of persecution and even death threats. I'll just call him RK. So yes, RK is just an amazing man. He he's a church planter at heart. And over the last 25 years, I would say he has started 72 regular churches, which are anywhere from 200 to 2,000 members throughout southern India. And then he's also started about 4,000 house churches, and these are ranging from anywhere from 6 to 200 members. And so as he goes through these areas, and he's preaching about a God of love, a God of forgiveness, a God where everyone is equal, where everyone has a purpose. I mean, you can imagine these outcast people who can't get a job even though they want a job. They're just doomed to sweeping toilets or, doing the most menial of jobs. This is the best news to them, to hear that, wow, really, I'm not being punished. I'm not hated by everybody. I'm not hated by God, and I'm created by a loving God. And so many people embrace this message. And in the process, if he and his pastors, he's raised up many youth leaders and pastors over the years. And so they're working in many different areas. And if they find an orphan or a widow, a handicapped person, homeless people, just marginalized people, he will bring them into his sponsorship programs, which I run from here. So we have a sponsorship program for orphans, widows, and people with leprosy. And I think one of the things that makes us unique is we really keep our costs low. And when I say low, I mean like bottom of the barrel low. Like to sponsor an orphan, it's $15 a month, and 100% goes to the child. And a widow, it's $2.50, and a leper, it's $6. And all of those costs or fees, I guess you could say, cover food, clothing, shelter, education, spiritual knowledge, and then job training for the future for the children.
Yeah. How do you keep the cost so low? How do you do that?
Well, I will credit RK because, well, we both have the same heart, and that is, how can we remove barriers from people giving to charity? Because when I started off with this, I realized how many people had been hurt by charities where nothing was reported back.
Mm.
Like when they gave money, no story was told, no report came back to them. So they didn't even know if their money was used wisely. And then a lot of people were having a lot of overhead costs for things. And I know we have to do that sometimes, and I'm not at all criticizing if charities have to do that. But I think sometimes there's been an abuse of that as well and not good communication back. I know I myself have been hurt by that a number of times, not getting, the reports that I would really ideally like to have when I give my hard-earned money. And so RK in particular is he has the same understanding that I do. We want a child to be able to help in some way. We want a person in a nursing home to be able to help. I mean, charity shouldn't just be for the rich person,
Yeah.
That's one thing. And also RK is just so clever. Like, for example, I was with him around Christmas time a few years ago, and we were trying to buy clothes for all the orphans. And at that time, he had 875 kids that he'd rescued over like 17 different homes of pastors. And he always takes them shopping for Christmas. Well, he goes shopping for them for Christmas and buys them clothing. But he had asked me, since I was in India, he said, Tracy, would you be willing to come and let the kids pick out their own clothes? They've never once had that opportunity. And I said, yes, sure, that'd be great. And they were so happy doing that. I mean, overjoyed to get to pick out what they wanted to wear. And so I got to the counter and I had the sponsor money and we had all the clothing, and I was really happy with the price. It was at a store called Easy Buy, but it was good quality, but it was cheap.
Yeah.
But RK comes up and he says, no, wait, my sister. And he's so funny the way he barters with everybody, but he starts this chattering back and forth with the store clerk. And I'm just smiling watching this, and I can't understand the language, of course, but I know exactly what he's doing. And by the time he finishes, he said, so I told this man that these are 75 of my 875 kids, and that they're all going to get an outfit for Christmas. And if he gives you 40% off, I will bring the rest of those kids shopping here. And
Wow.
so the man was discussing with the other owner there, and they came back and slashed my ticket right in half. And so it was even lower than it should have been. Another example of that is we do a books project for kids in the slums. So this is not our orphans. They of course go to school, but there's so many kids in India that want to go to school. I mean, they're out there drawing in the sand and they're drawing on walls. They want to learn and they're just idle. And their parents can't afford to send them because there's a book fee or
Mm.
uniforms and different fees for school. And the parents might make 50 cents a day driving a rickshaw, working so hard but not making anything. And so we've had a goal of sending, the first year we started a few years ago, 20,000 kids to school in the slums, buying books for them. But when I got that report from RK, he said we had paid for 50,000. And I said, I don't understand. I'm not good at math, but I know we only gave money for 20,000 to go to school. And he said, yes, but he said, I looked at the books from the year before and the kids only used half the pages. So we cut the size in half. Then I went to the books man, and he's just overjoyed because we're giving him so much business, and he's poor too, but now he's rich because he's getting all this income. And so he cut our price in half too, just to give us a discount because he was so overjoyed with us. RK builds relationships with people, and he has a way of guilting them in a nice way. Like he'll say, this is ministry we're doing here together. This is for the good of all these people. Think of how many more will benefit. He's just convincing. I haven't seen
Yeah.
anybody say no to him. I mean,
Wow.
yeah,
Yeah.
he can convince anybody.
He's giving them more and more business, which supports them and their families and their lifestyle.
Right.
And yet
Yeah.
he's giving them a sense of purpose through their work and
Yeah.
allowing them to participate in this partnership with all the people
Right.
that you're serving together. That's just really amazing. And then on top of it, the people that are donating on the other side of things are then their money is able to go even farther. So really you've
Right.
kind of tapped into this economies of scale, if you will, by swimming upstream. You're doing things a little bit differently, and it's really neat, and it's amazing too. I've seen you do the same thing with water wells. You build water wells. Tell us about that. Tell us about the water wells.
Yeah. Yeah, that's been, in the gospel, it often talks about multiplication principles, like, when Jesus was standing with the 5,000 people who needed to eat, and the disciples are said, how are we going to feed these people? And of course, they had no idea. But a little boy comes with faith and says, here's my fish and loaves, which of course, any of us would think, well, that's not enough. But Jesus took it and he made it enough. He made it overflowing even. And this is what has happened with so many of our projects. And I can only honestly give God the glory because, we're not that great, but on our own at all. But, God will, when you have your hand open and you're willing to give to him what you have, even if you think it's not enough, he can make it more. And you have faith that he will. And so with these wells in 2014, I was in India and Raj sat down with me and he was kind of emotional. And he said, Tracy, we have a real problem here in India. And he went on to tell me how many people lack clean drinking water and how many people die because of it. Children die of diseases, preventable diseases. And he said, if you were to walk out here in my neighborhood, you'd see so many where they're drinking. They're drinking from the river, filthy ponds. And he said, do you think you could help me and go back to the United States and ask people to donate for clean water? And at that time, he had a man named James. And James had just turned from Hinduism to Christianity. And James was a well worker. He was placing wells just independently in villages for $350 each, just hand pump wells.
Yeah.
I said to him, okay, James, now you're part of my ministry team. We need to do this as a ministry. He said, if Tracy can go back to the United States and we can find people to give, will you lower your price from $350 to $250? If we can do 10 wells at a time. Well, James thought of the math and he said yes, because he hadn't had a lot of business. He was like an untouchable poor man, and it's hard for him to get work. And he had a wife and 2 kids, and they were living just in squalor, complete squalor at that time. And so I came back here, and because of the amazing community we live in, it didn't take a lot of convincing to ask people, do you want to give $220 for a well? And you can have your name on the plaque. You can dedicate it to anybody. It's personalized. So you even know that you have this village that you're taking care of. And then he told me too that each well helps 1,000 to 3,000 people. And that's a thing about India too, is it's so populated. It's soon going to pass China as the most populated country. So anything you do there is going to affect so many people. I've seen that. So people responded, and our goal our first year was 100 wells for 2014, and we did that. Then it just kept escalating, and then he lowered the price from 220 to he went to 250 to 220 and then to 190. And because he said the lower we have it, the more people will help, the more wells we can get. So as of today, we are at 3,500 wells that we've placed in 4 different states in southern India. And talk about a multiplication. I mean, we're doing 100 wells faithfully every month, and we have been now for about 2 years. So we went from 100 a year to 100 a month. And this James, a literate man, he can't even read or write. And so he started with him and 2 other men, and they would go, and this is hard work. You're in the sun. I've helped place these wells. It's hard work, but they're strong. I mean, it's physical labor. And then pretty soon it was 5 men. Pretty soon it was 10. Now there's a crew of 50.
Wow.
And yep, 5 teams of 10, and they go all over southern India. They travel miles now. We're going way out to get these wells. And on the well, you can have like I said, it's personalized, and then our case phone number is on there. And he always has 200 requests for wells, 300 requests for wells. And we had a meeting the other day, and he said, I hope to do 10,000 more wells, Tracy. And I thought, wow, we're dreaming big now. But praise God.
Yeah.
And I think of the numbers, it still seems like a drop in the bucket when you think of the millions of people in India. But, RK tells me we've helped a minimum now of 3 million people, and it's anywhere from 3 million to 5 million, probably, or 6 million. So I don't know. But when I've heard and read so much about just the simple gift of water. I mean, girls have to walk 3 to 5 miles a day to fetch water, and often they're raped on the way. They fall down, they hurt themselves. They can't go to school because of the time fetching water every day.
Mm-hmm.
And any of us, like I get up in the morning, I'm thirsty right away. I take a shower, I cook. Everything is with water. Everything. It's just a foundational thing. And if you don't have that, it just affects your quality of life in 1,000 different ways. And so, yeah, that's a huge part of our ministry, and creating jobs. That's what's been such a blessing, is seeing these men benefit and their families. Because even when we went to India, James wanted to invite our whole team to his house, and he now has still a small house, but he even has AC in there, air conditioning, which most people don't have. And he had us sit around his little room, and we had our plates on the bed. But this is luxury to him. I mean, his kids are in a good school, his wife is doing well. And right above the door, he has a picture of Jesus, and he credits God with blessing his life in this way. It's just a blessing that comes from following God. And he just felt like, this is my blessing of just giving my skills and joining this ministry team. So it's just been a win-win.
Right. And you mentioned that it's a drop in the bucket because there's so many people in India. But when you say 3 million to 5 million people, that adds up so quickly. That is not a drop in the bucket, and just to think how God has placed each of you in this web, if you will, to create this system to allow you guys to partner and work together, because without any one of you, the job couldn't get done. And
That's right.
all of these
Yeah.
people that are benefiting from the orphans and the lepers and the widows and just people in poverty, and the list goes on, and these families in so many ways, it's just really encouraging and exciting to hear that this is happening. And I also just love your organization and this work that you do too, because it does feel so grassroots, like in a good way. Like we're able to hear these real stories. It's not overproduced. It's just hearing it from the field. And like you said, cutting the cost down, everything goes 100% to the mission. It's just, like you said, I think it's really something that's unique. And so
Thank you.
I love that so much. Okay. So just quickly before we wrap up, I know that there's some, well, you mentioned that RK has how many children? 80 children or 800 children?
Well, he's had, since he started, I think he's taken care of probably 1,300 kids, and they're
Okay.
always graduating and moving on. So it's hard at any given time to know. But yeah, right now I believe he has like 800 that are living in his homes. There's a bunch that graduated this year too. So
Right. And he's housing these in his orphanage, right? All of these children, or how does
yep,
it work?
they're spread out over, I think it's 17 different homes of pastors and their
Okay.
wives have these kids. And during COVID, they had to go into the village and be split up into groups of 4 or 5. So this huge
Mhm.
network of pastors and youth leaders have taken in these kids during COVID, but now they're coming back to those homes again, those original orphanages.
Are you loving this episode? Come join us in the Love Light Stories Facebook community, where we make this show come to life. My goal is to make this more than a podcast and truly create a space where we can learn and grow alongside one another in community. Here, we can learn alongside each other with curiosity and humility, and ultimately emulate more love and light to all we meet. You'll be the first to know about upcoming coffee chats, in person events, book studies, and more. It's here where we'll go deeper in discussion around the topics we explore on the show. You'll even have the chance to meet guests from time to time. Go to stephaniemjacobs.com/manifesto to join. You'll receive an instant download of our manifesto with access to the community. Oh, and did I mention it's all free? So what are you waiting for? Come join us. I just can't wait to meet you, lovely. So I just want to get a glimpse into the lives and hearts of these children, because I think you shared at least one story with me that was just so touching and just so encouraging to see the transformation that is occurring from the love and support that they're receiving through RK and the other pastors.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, wow. I could tell you 10 stories, but no time for that. But so there's one boy named Mahesh, and Mahesh is so precious. His smile could light up a room. It's like the sun, big white teeth, out of this tan face. And Mahesh was 3 years old, living with his mom, and his dad had been an alcoholic and used to beat his mom a lot. And he abandoned the family. So it was Mahesh and his brother and his mom. And Mahesh, even at age 3, knew my mom's a widow. This is a problem. So he went to look for a job, and he went 3 doors down where the man had a buffalo, and he offered to clean the man's buffalo stall for 30 cents a day at age 3. And that's what he was doing. And then he would go and beg outside the bakery because he was so hungry. Every day he was hungry. They would eat maybe once a day. Unfortunately, that man at the bakery would just slap him away and say, "Get out of here, you street rat." Not help him, never give him anything. And one day RK was coming down that street, and he saw him, and he started talking to him. He said, "How long have you been standing here?" And Mahesh said, "My whole life." Anyway, a short time later, his mom died, and Mahesh was brought to the orphanage along with his brother, grew up there. And I can remember hearing his voice. I've been to India 8 times with teens, and every morning at 5 a.m. I'd hear Mahesh's booming voice. He'd be helping get, the rice ready for the day, the stuff we had to do for our outreaches to the widows or to the lepers or wherever we were going. He'd be hauling it outside, and it's hard worker. And he always had a dream of starting his own bakery. to help kids that were in trouble like he was or on the street, just for discount, and then bring food to the hospital there too, because the hospitals don't provide food for the patients. So the families have to bring food if they have a family. And so anyway, and anytime RK would go to the big city to get supplies, Mahesh, he'd ask some of the kids, what do you want me to bring you back? And Mahesh always said bread, 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 bread for many years. Well, anyway, so RK had said, okay, you can start this bakery, but I want you to go to college first and just get some skills. And so Mahesh is now about 22. And so he headed off to college. And in the meantime, he started a job over like an electronics cell phone type shop. Well, he's now been promoted over 5 shops. He's over 100 employees at age 22.
Wow.
And his boss wants to send him to Dubai for more training, like leadership training and stuff, because he's such a hard worker and so awesome in what he's doing. And then one other quick story is a girl named Shalini. Shalini remembers her mom walking away from her in the village at age 5 and saying, I can't care for you anymore. And Shalini remembers shifting her mind from, okay, my mom fed me, but now I have to feed myself. I have to find food somewhere every day. And so her life was so hard, and she was rescued, grew up, and she's wanted to become a nurse. And these older kids, Mahesh and Shalini, are some of the oldest ones now. And they have been so amazing. They've been trained to be leaders in RK's programs. And one day RK was so happy. He's like, something really great happened today. And this was probably 3-4 years ago. He said, he named the kids, and it was Mahesh and Shalini and some others. He said, they organized an outreach to the lepers all by themselves, and they took food. Without me, they went. And he said, when they came back, I asked them, so did you touch the lepers? And did you feed them? And, did you actually touch them? And they said, well, of course we did. We've seen you do that for years. And we've seen Tracy from the United States and her people she brings and all these people. Why wouldn't we touch the lepers? And so seeing how this mindset of giving to the poor is just completely translated down to these kids. And now Shalini became a nurse. And the other day she got a wonderful job she's staff nurse at a hospital in Vijayawada. And she's been working there, I think, for over a year. And RK got a call from the administrator, and he said, I want to praise your daughter, Shalini. He said she comes in all the time when other workers don't show up. She fills in for people. She works 12-hour shifts. She's so calm and patient if there's any crisis. And anyway, they then promoted her. And so she's also 22, and she's over all the nurses at the hospital.
Wow.
And so I look at this and I think, it says in the Bible how God, the last will be first and the first will be last. And, God really raises up the humble. And I think he raises up these kids that have just been thrown away by society. Society says you're nothing. And God says, just wait. That's not my economy. You're going to be the leaders in your culture. And I see that happening. And they're being transformative in their workplaces. And I think RK is very proud of these kids.
Yes. It's just a beautiful testament too of these children were born into a society that was very stigmatized, like we talked about in the caste system, right? Yet through this love and nurturing that they've received and the example of RK and others that they've seen, they're now following the ways of Christ. And even if it wasn't the ways of Christ, whatever you may call it, they are loving people well, and they're serving people that are untouchable in their society and being so successful themselves, like you said. And, even if your work didn't touch as many people as it does, just the few testimonies that you've even shared today, right, is so meaningful. Like that life is invaluable in God's eyes, and the human dignity. And I just hope and pray that God continues to bless you and the ministry and RK and everybody, especially and for the sake of these people that you're serving.
Thank you so much.
It's just really beautiful. So, okay, before we wrap up, I want to ask if there's any way people can follow you, get involved, any of that you'd like to point people to.
Yeah, so I don't do a lot with social media simply because, again, I also have partners in Nepal and Uganda, but they face persecution, and I always want to be so careful that I don't jeopardize their safety. But if anybody wants to either reach out to me on email, it's just Amistad, Amistad Worldwide at gmail.com. I'm in my email every day, multiple times a day, or you can text me 701-388-0178. or you can go to our website, which is just amistadworldwide.org, and there is a page there that will take you right to my email, and you can fill that out and say, I'm interested in sponsoring an orphan or a leper or a well or whatever it is that you're interested in. And then I receive that and I email you back directly. We don't do any online donations simply because we're trying to keep our costs low. I pay all my own trips and printing of brochures, etc. So we're always trying to keep our costs down so that we can just keep being as effective as possible with getting funds overseas. So we have not gone the electronic payment route yet, but lots of pressure to do that.
Yes, yes. Well, it's in keeping with the focus that you've tried to do and keeping the cost low and like you said, 100% going to the mission. So if people want to donate, they can get in touch with you those multiple ways and they can easily send that donation. Shouldn't be too much of a barrier for anyone. Thank you so much, Tracy. This has just been so wonderful. I'm just delighted that people can finally meet you and hear your personal story and how God really placed experiences, people in your life to lead you to what he has called you to do and how you've really harnessed that and partnered with people around the world that have the same calling, that you can work together for his kingdom and bring glory through all of that. It's just incredible. So thank you so much. And I really hope everyone listening has really gotten a good piece of your heart because it is so pure.
Oh, thank you so much, Stephanie. And thank you for what you're doing, giving people like me a platform because, it's nice to have a place to tell our story. And you're doing something very important. So thank you for that.
Yeah,
Truly.
thank you. Thank you so much. It was wonderful to talk with you.
Yeah, you too. Thank you, Steph.
Wasn't it so easy to see how invested Tracy is in helping the vulnerable? It's easy to see throughout her entire testimony story that she's constantly been in seek of God's calling on her heart, while also being diligent to make sure she's learning all she can to keep her intentions and work pure. I also love how her experiences have informed Amistad and the purpose for which it exists. She wanted to be a friend to the missionary, to come alongside them as they're on the ground doing the work day after day in country. What a great way to let the Indigenous people lead and garner support for that which they really need. Did you learn a thing or two about India too? I found it really interesting to better understand the power of the caste system specifically, and I like how Tracy shared her reflections to help us begin to empathize with a culture and belief system that is foreign to many of us. Oh, and I also really love her grassroots style of keeping costs as low as possible to help as many people as possible, virtually making charity accessible to most anyone. And the fact that 100% of the funds raised go directly to the mission is rare these days, wouldn't you say? If you want to support this work through Amistad, get in touch with Tracy. You can donate by contacting her through email at amistadworldwide@gmail.com, text her at 701-388-0178, or send her a message through their website at amistadworldwide.org. Did this episode touch your heart? If you loved today's story and have a relatable experience to share, encouraging words for our guests, or just want to share a comment, go to the show notes for this episode and send us what we like to call heart mail for a chance to have your note featured on an upcoming episode. If there's a large response to any particular story, we might just bring that guest back on the show to dive into your comments, or even have them join us as a guest in the Love Light Stories Facebook community. It's as easy as sending us a voice message or written note, both easily accessible in today's show notes. Simply go to stephaniemjacobs.com and click on the Stories tab. So, give it a try. Send us your heart mail. I just can't wait to hear what's on your heart. And hey, thank you so much for listening to this podcast and leaning into today's story. And don't forget, you can subscribe to the show wherever you listen to your podcast so you don't ever miss an episode. And a great way you can support these conversations is to rate the show and leave a review. And if you have a friend who would like these stories, share it with them too. All of these things are the best way you can support this podcast. So thank you. And until next time, lovelies, keep radiating that love and light to everyone you meet.